In this lesson, we're going to edit a joint limit. After completing this lesson, you'll be able to modify joint limits. In Fusion 360, we're going to carry on with our utility knife missing joints design. Now that we understand exactly how to apply a joint and animate it, we're going to create what's called a joint limit. Right now, this joint can move freely through other solid bodies. And what we want to do is we want to use the design intent behind it to drive how much that joint can actually move. In this case, we're going to right-click on our slider joint, and we're going to go to Edit Joint Limits. The motion type right now is slide, and that's the only option. But when you get into joints with higher degrees of freedom, such as a planar joint, you're going to be able to control the motion in all of the available degrees of freedom. So in this case, we're going to determine the minimum and the maximum values. We know that our minimum is 0 and our maximum is 28, but also note that we have on-screen manipulators that allow us to drag these values around. I'm going to set this value to 28 as my max travel. Note that we can also animate this, which will go between the extents of that limit, keeping in mind that it's not respecting all the joints in the design. We also have the option to determine a rest position. A rest position will mean that component will snap to that location after you release the cursor. So if we set this to 28, for example, and say OK, as soon as we move this, it's going to snap to that rest position. As soon as we move it in and out and let go, it snaps back to that position. I'm going to modify the joint limit, and we can do this by right-clicking on the joint in the timeline and editing the joint limit here as well. I'm going to turn off the rest position and say OK, and then revert my position. Now let's go ahead and view this from the right side, and let's zoom in. So we're starting at 0, and we're moving all the way back, and you can see that it allows it to go to those positions, and it seems to respect the rest of the solid bodies. Keep in mind that there are other options that we could also use, but in this instance, because this is a snap latch or a plastic part that uses tension, this is not going to allow us to use something called contact sets because there's already an overlap between the body. If we want to use contact sets to explore the physical interaction between solid bodies, you can go to the Assemble menu and you can enable contact sets. This can be done between specific bodies, or this can be done between all bodies in the file. If we enable contact sets, a contact set option pops up in the browser, and then we can right-click and create a new contact set, or we can enable them between all the bodies. For example, if we select New Contact Set, and we look at the blade holder and this body, we say OK, it'll prevent motion because they're already overlapping. So this is why we can't explore contact sets in this design. I'm going to right-click and delete that contact set, and I'm going to right-click and disable contact sets altogether. So just keep in mind that we have many different options when we're trying to create mechanical motion. We can simply create components and apply our joints as needed. We can also put further constraints on those by adding joint limits. And we also have the option to explore contact sets if the design requires it. I generally will only use contact sets if I can't replicate the motion with a joint. Something like a gear is better suited to a joint and a motion link rather than using a contact set, because you will be giving up processing in order to calculate those interactions. From here, however, let's make sure that we do save this file before we move on to the next lesson.